Welcome to the Ghostly Gallery podcast, a place where we explore the world of horror and mystery in film, television, literature, and popular culture. Well, greetings again, everybody. Welcome to the latest show. My name is Bruce Marcuson. As always, I'm joined by co-host and producer Tracy Asteria. Tracy, how are you doing tonight?
Doing really good, Bruce. Enjoying a little bit of summer, and believe it or not, yesterday actually felt like fall, which was really weird. It was very cool and very windy, and it kind of had a weird Halloween vibe in the atmosphere. So, yeah, strange times, Bruce. How's everything with you?
Things are going pretty well. The weather is sort of like that here today, and it actually makes a fitting backdrop for what we're going to be talking about. This is going to be our version of the Alfred Hitchcock hour, or maybe a little more than an hour. We have a terrific guest coming up, Tracy, as you know, and it's a return visit from one of our favorites. His name is Professor Sidney Gottlieb. Sidney is an author, editor, scholar, one of the leading experts on the works of Alfred Hitchcock. This will be the second time we've had him on. He was terrific the first time around. Sidney is a professor of communications and media studies at Sacred Heart University, which is in Fairfield, Connecticut. He has taught there since 1976, and Sid's the co-editor of the Hitchcock Annual. He has also edited numerous books on Hitchcock as well. We're going to be talking to Sid about 4 Hitchcock films in particular, and they are in chronological order: Rebecca, 1940 release; Notorious, 1946, 80 years ago. Then we're going to talk about the 1956 film, The Man Who Knew Too Much, celebrating a 70th anniversary this year. And then we'll discuss Alfred Hitchcock's final film, which I just saw earlier this week for the first time. It's called Family Plot, came out 50 years ago in 1976. So we'll talk in depth with Sid about all 4 of those, get his thoughts. Sid, welcome back to the Ghostly Gallery. How have you been?
I've been good. I've been missing you, and I'm so happy to be back here. Had a great time the first time, and I'm looking forward to more of the same. And this may be our opportunity to really talk about ghosts, because featured, in the Ghostly Gallery. I don't know that Hitchcock is big on what we normally think of as ghosts, but the films that you've chosen, yeah, we do see some Hitchcockian ghosts. So this is going to be a lot of fun, right up your alley, maybe right up mine too. Looking forward to it.
Awesome.
Well, we know it's up your alley, no question. I mean, you're the guy that knows just about everything there is to know about Hitchcock, although you keep studying it, you keep learning more. Before we get to the movies, I wanted to ask you how the last 2 semesters go at Sacred Heart for you.
Life goes on, and the good news is teaching is one of the real joys of my life. I always knew I wanted to be a teacher, and one of the best decisions I've ever made in my life. It's always a challenge, and maybe that's part of the joy. So these days, maybe a different mentality and approach by students. And there are so many things these days that are competing with being a student. But again, it's a challenge. I'm trying to meet up with the challenge, and I'm always teaching interesting things. I don't know that I necessarily make them interesting. I do my best, but I'm getting ready to teach another course on Hitchcock next semester in the fall. I teach film history all the time. I teach courses in media studies, the media environment that we live in. These are things that are really interesting to me, and I think very important, and the students respond to them. So that's a long-winded way of saying, yeah, I'm having a good time. I hope my students are. I'm learning something. I hope my students are as well.
Do you have multiple classes of students on Hitchcock, or do you have just one big class?
Well, the way it works usually is it'll rotate. I don't teach a class on Hitchcock all the time, but every couple of years there'll be a dedicated film class, the films of Alfred Hitchcock, or most recently, an interesting spin on that, Hitchcock and his influence, or Hitchcock and his imitators. So we not only focused on, and the semesters just fly by, for me anyway. For the students, I don't know if they're counting down, oh my God, 14 weeks, but I'm thinking 14 weeks just goes by so quickly. But the last time we did, I think, 10 or 11 Hitchcock films. And then we turned to some films by other filmmakers that have the Hitchcock touch. So that's a dedicated Hitchcock class.
Yeah.
Other classes as well, but in a film history class that I teach, if it's early film history, later film history, I always find a way of squeezing in one Hitchcock film. But it's a very special opportunity for me to teach a whole semester devoted to Hitchcock. And I've done it recently.
Yeah.
And as I said, I'm looking forward to it in the fall again.
Nice.
That's terrific. So for tonight's discussion, we picked 4 films, 3 of which celebrate anniversaries in 2026. But first up, I wanted to talk about the only Hitchcock film to win the Academy Award for Best Picture. And one of the reasons I picked this, from 1940, Rebecca, shame on me, I'd never seen it until this past winter. I don't know why. It's kind of ridiculous because I've been a long Hitchcock fan, and I finally got around to seeing it, loved it. Before we get Sid's thoughts on it, we'll give you the quick storyline. So it's a film about a young personal assistant. She's rather shy and unimposing, and she meets this wealthy man, Maxim de Winter. The two fall in love. They marry rather quickly, and then they move to Maxim's large country estate located in Cornwall. Now, Max, he's still troubled by the death of his first wife, Rebecca. She was apparently killed in a boating accident 1 year earlier. The second Mrs. De Winter struggles to get along with Maxim's housekeeper, Mrs. Danvers, and she discovers that Rebecca somehow has maintained a power over and a loyalty from everyone living and working at the De Winter estate. First off on this one, Sidney, it's interesting. Hitchcock made this movie in Hollywood after making films in England. Why did he make that decision?
I'm sure there were multiple reasons, but at the risk of oversimplifying it, Hitchcock was a very ambitious director. And I don't mean ambition just in the kind of, oh, I want to make more money or I want to have more power, but he wanted to have access to larger budgets, a larger pool of really experienced, not only actors, but technicians. So he wanted more, if I say power, I mean creative power to make the kind of films that he wanted to make. And Hollywood had that. It's not as though making films in England was like a real backwater, but well, since I'm on screen, I can do this. There's England, and then there's Hollywood. Cinema, world cinema was pretty much Hollywood dominated. So I think he was very attracted to it for all those reasons. He made great films in England, and he had lots of opportunities, worked with great people. But I think those kind of access to those creative possibilities really opened up by moving to Hollywood. There were certain things that you might consider drawbacks as well, but throughout his career, Hitchcock had a really uncanny way of navigating those drawbacks and maybe even turning them to his advantage.
I'm curious. The film is based on a book by Du Maurier, famous book. I've never read the book, though. So how faithful is the film to what Du Maurier wrote?
That's a more complicated question than it might on the surface seem to be. Whenever you adapt something, there has to be changes, selections. We can't include it all. We're going to emphasize this, and also the mere fact that a filmmaker is visualizing things for us rather than we're reading and we get to do the visualizing and the filling in the blanks. So there are always those differences. Now, in the case of Rebecca, it was not necessarily a project chosen by him. When he came to Hollywood, he was signed by David O. Selznick, who was in the process of making his own adaptation of Gone with the Wind. Selznick liked the idea of films that took a pre-sold product, like Gone with the Wind, legendary, incredibly popular novel. Rebecca had the same kind of standing and kind of reputation. So to get back a little bit more specifically to your question, there were many people who had read Rebecca who couldn't wait for it to be a film. But from Selznick's perspective, he wanted Hitchcock to deliver Du Maurier's Rebecca. Hitchcock, needless to say, had his own mind. He wanted to change things around, sometimes in the process of visualizing things, but also sometimes even in terms of let's change the character, let's put different emphases there. I'll end by saying, I don't know if this is a spoiler alert. I hope it doesn't spoil things. But one of the key things about Rebecca is who's responsible for the death of Rebecca. Well, can I put it most simply? It really could not be filmed the way it was in the novel. Should I give more details about that?
Sure. Absolutely.
In the novel, you said before, well, Rebecca apparently died in a boating accident. Well, in the novel, it's clear that the tension, that the enemies, that the real buildup of drama culminated in Maxime killing her. But and then the norm in Hollywood was that you could have that kind of crime, but you couldn't have the hero. If somebody was presented as killing the character, justice needed to triumph.
Right.
So basically, they needed to change that, and that was a really substantive change. And it's something that was a real challenge for the scriptwriter and for Hitchcock. I think Hitchcock was very pleased that the film was as well received and popular as it was. But when he described the film, particularly to Truffaut in that wonderful book-length, week-long series of interviews that Hitchcock had with Truffaut, where they talked by film about everything he did up to the time of the interview. The short version of it is, I think Hitchcock basically said it really wasn't a Hitchcock film. There was so much pressure from the studio, from Selznick in particular, to do it a certain way that Hitchcock felt kind of hemmed in by that. And the differences between the original novel and the film version notwithstanding, I think Hitchcock kind of felt that, well, you know what, I did the best I could, but it turned out to be a Du Maurier film rather than a Hitchcock.
Very interesting. I'm used to seeing Joan Fontaine, who played the second Mrs. De Winter.
Yes.
I'm used to seeing her later in career.
Yeah.
In the 60s on. And I almost didn't recognize her. She's so young in this movie.
Yeah.
and I guess it's one of her earlier films. That was sort of a shock to me, just on a personal note. I don't know if you have any feelings on that. She's wonderful in the film, but boy, she's just so young.
I think that's one of the things that is really emphasized in the film. Now, the novel had any number of dimensions. It was a gothic story. It was a horror story about haunting. It was a story of obsessions of various kinds. And of course, it was also the story of a budding romance, as you suggested, and the story of the growth, the maturation of a young woman, an extremely young woman. Um, Hitchcock hits on all those levels, but one of the things that I find most interesting in the film is really that plot development, the development, the maturation of a young woman. She's girlish. She's absolutely almost adolescent. And I hope that doesn't come across in any condescending way, because there's more to her than that. Even at the very beginning of the film, when she is a kind of aide to a very domineering, older woman, she does her best to kind of stand up to her, but she's very put upon and she has limited resources. It's clear that she took that job because she needs to support herself. Of her had died, and so she's very vulnerable. But also there's a sense that she's undeveloped in other ways. But that's a long-winded way of saying, I think that to me is the absolute core of the film. And it needed a young woman, an actress who could play a young woman, but also play a young woman with complexity, resources, and the capacity for growth. And like you say, Joan Fontaine is absolutely memorable in it.
Yeah. It was about halfway through watching the movie this past winter, and I realized, wait a minute, they've never named Joan Fontaine's character, and they would not name her for the rest of the film either. Why do you think Hitchcock made that decision?
Well, there's an easy answer to that question, and then one that's a little bit more complicated. The easy answer is that's the way it was in the novel. Now, they could have basically said, well, let's call her whatever, Dolores, Joan, or whatever. But that's the way it was in the novel. And to a certain extent, as I was saying before, there was really pressure for the film to come out as very authentic in terms of being true to the details and the spirit of the novel. So then that raises the larger question, which is why is she unnamed in the novel? Now, I think there are many more people more qualified than myself to talk about that. But at the risk of saying something that I suppose is maybe a little bit pedestrian, we just got through talking about how this is the story of the growth and development of a woman. It seems perfectly fitting that she kind of basically doesn't even have a name from the very beginning. And the name that's given is something that puts a lot of pressure on her. She's referred to as Mrs. De Winter or the second Mrs. De Winter. That really alerts us how there's a haunting presence of the first Mrs. De Winter, who is clearly named Rebecca, and not only named, but named repeatedly. There's references to Rebecca everywhere that the second Mrs. De Winter turns in the new house that she is now the so-called mistress of. We see a big R for Rebecca. We see clothing. We see a room that is kind of a shrine to her. So as it turns out, that's a kind of long-winded response to why it just seems so perfect that she's called the second Mrs. De Winter. Now, it would be kind of nice, or maybe it would be clunky if towards the end, her name, a given name was revealed or whatever. But you know what? Maybe that's the difference between a really brilliant and subtle filmmaker like Hitchcock and leaves it open until the very end, because she continues to be haunted, and as do the other characters, by Rebecca. But maybe my more pedestrian thing is, oh, let her grow into a name. No, it's that second Mrs. Winter hanging over the growth.
So this film has been called a ghost story without ghosts. Is that accurate?
A lot depends on how you define a ghost. And I sort of grew up with, dare I say it, Casper, and I grew up with the ghost stories where there's really that, all that, and the kind of where you actually see signs of a ghost and whatever. But I think in Hitchcock's hands, and to my mind, in the hands of the great artists that work within the ghost tradition, what they do is they turn the ghost into something far more than that. And I have to kind of toy with the idea of a presence, because Rebecca in this film is constantly present, but not physically present. But nor is she present in the kind of, oh no, what was that? Who is that character that just flitted by the camera? So there really is this wonderful creation of the unseen. And this is one of the great themes throughout Hitchcock, trying to convey the absolute palpability, the absolute presence of the past. And along with that, with people who maybe are no longer alive or again, physically present. How do you do that? And Rebecca is not the only film where he does that, but it's certainly one of his early ventures into exploring that. So in that respect, maybe it's implicit in what I'm saying. There are many direct links between Rebecca and a film like Vertigo, which also has the palpable presence of the past, and quite literally refers to people who are no longer with us, but having a real effect on the present day. So it is certainly a complex play with the idea of ghosts.
Yeah. My last question on Rebecca, there's little doubt this is one of his finest films. You could make an argument, maybe it's his best. Obviously, that's a matter of personal choice. You've got great actors, Joan Fontaine and, of course, Laurence Olivier, whom we have not mentioned yet. Both are in it. Both are at the top of their game. It's a great story. What for you is the single biggest reason why this becomes one of Hitchcock's top tier films ever?
I only get one. I think we really need to try to squeeze in a few things.
All right.
I think when you talk about an artwork, a film, whatever, as being really popular and has long legs, so to speak, surely there are going to be multiple reasons for it. So if I can just tick off a couple of them. I think the narrative, the development of the story, and even though we started out by talking about the growth of a young woman, there's more to it than that. Hitchcock was not a great fan of whodunits, and his mysteries were much more complicated than we don't know, and then we find out. But actually, Rebecca is one of his exercises in a kind of whodunit revolving around how did Rebecca die? So there's the narrative level of that, which is really teasing and just really so well executed. There's the theme of the growth of the young woman. There's the theme of the developing relationship between the young woman and her husband. Um, and then I guess there are so many of what we might call atmospheric dimensions. The novel was meant to be a Gothic novel with a kind of creepiness and a kind of horror level. And that is, as you know, of course, from what I hear, there are even whole podcasts based on works like that. So, of course, it's a particular interest of yours, and your many followers. So let me add one more thing.
Mhm.
Personal note, Rebecca was never one of my go-to Hitchcock films. I always respected it, and I respected the artistry of it, and I respected the fact that it was so well-known and popular among critics that I really respected. It took me a while to get into Rebecca, but I think one thing that has helped is that it has become a real go-to film for feminist critics, feminist film critics, focusing again on the character, the woman character, focusing on the whole Gothic atmosphere, which really is fascinating when seen from a feminist perspective, because at the root of so many Gothic stories is not only a sense of horror and danger and vulnerability, but all that coming to bear on women in particular. And add to that, that this is a film that is very much about woman to woman relationships. The relationship of the second Mrs. De Winter and the ghostly Rebecca, the relationship of Mrs. Danvers, who it doesn't do her justice to say that she's the secondary character. She is absolutely essential. And her relationship to Rebecca. And also, and I have to give the short version of this, but the sense that at first viewing, Rebecca may seem to be a malevolent spirit. She disrupts things. She causes a lot of problems. The more we find out about her, the more it seems like she is just wicked. She does what she wants and she wreaks havoc on many people or whatever. Not surprisingly, the feminist take on that is, let's take a step back and kind of say what is often caricatured as a wicked woman is in fact an independent and empowered, a really forceful woman. And to call her wicked and to look at her as evil or whatever, that needs review. So I hope I haven't gone on too long about that, but on all reasons, I think Rebecca is a real presence in the Hitchcock canon now.
All right, great analysis of Rebecca from 1940. Tracy's going to introduce us to our second film. Tracy?
Okay, so we're going to talk about the movie Notorious, and it was released in 1946, and it stars Cary Grant, Ingrid Bergman, and Claude Rains. And the story follows Alicia Uberman, a daughter of a convicted Nazi spy, who is recruited by an American intelligence agent to infiltrate a group of former Nazis living in Brazil. As part of her assignment, Alicia develops a relationship with Alexander Sebastian, one of the men she's investigating. She quickly marries him just to maintain her cover, but at the same time, she and the agent that recruited her, Mr. Devlin, they begin to develop feelings for each other, and it just makes the mission a little more complicated. Alicia gets a little bit deeper into the assignment, and the situation becomes a little bit more dangerous and a lot more personal. It's complicated. There's secrets, there's trust issues, relationships, everything collides, and it is another classic Hitchcock thriller. So my question to start this out is, Sidney, there is a lot going on in this movie. There's a spy story, relationships between the characters. What do you think makes Notorious such an important film in Hitchcock's career?
Well, you kind of stole what otherwise I would say would be my thunder. In your summary of the film, you really indicated how this is a film like Rebecca. I got through giving a kind of laundry list of the different buttons that Rebecca pushes and the different genres that it's allied with and plot levels. Notorious is very much that way. And you really highlighted, I think, the two main ones, which is that you could look at it as an incredible prize and war story, even though, interestingly enough, it's filmed right after the end of the war. I think one of the premises of the film is, well, we can celebrate the so-called end of the war, but let's not think we're out of the woods completely. There are odds, there are still international danger. There are still Nazi or fascists. So there's certainly that level, and that's a key part of the film. But it is also one of the great romances. And Cary Grant, it's almost like say no more. Let things happen. But as you indicated, where things get a little complicated, it not only gets complicated because of, dare I say, the usual difficulties when you get a man and a woman trying to form an intimate relationship. But again, spoiler alert, when it turns out that the woman is sent by the man on a mission that is, well, to summarize it, it's the Matahari mission. For the sake of national security and national health, we want you to leave behind Cary Grant. Oh my God, if that is a big challenge. And instead of working out the complexities of that relationship, we want you to basically throw yourself at a Nazi spy. And as it turns out, they get married. It's not just that they sleep together, you know, the Matahari kind of thing, but there's that going on. So there's all those levels of complexity and importance and the way they're woven together. Hitchcock does an absolutely masterful job. And by the way, I probably said the same thing last time. I stated, A, let's credit Hitchcock the man for everything that he did, but B, let's add the screenwriter and the cinematographer, the wonderful thing in it, all those other that contribute to the Hitchcock touch.
Right.
But Notorious just really keeps us hopping, keeps us interested, keeps us engaged in all of those levels.
Oh, absolutely. Why do you think Hitchcock is so drawn to doing films about spies and stuff like that, do you think?
Well, I don't know if my answer will be convincing to everyone. And I want to say two things that might sound contradictory. I just got through doing can I say this? A long podcast with me here. A long podcast on the 39 Steps. Wonderful film, which has many kind of, a lot of continuity between that and some of his later films, of course, North by Northwest, but also even a film like Notorious. And I found myself quoting one of the great critics of Hitchcock. And by critics, I mean analysts and admirers, Robin Wood, who basically said, if we look at the 39 Steps as a spy film, it's not as though that isn't important, but in a way that is a screen for Hitchcock's major central interest, which is human relations, especially female relations, problems of intimacy, and in this case, between a man and a woman. On the other hand, I don't think that the spy background is just a screen. And now I'm shifting to Notorious. I think it's sort of, in a way, it's well known that Hitchcock was attracted to spy stories, and international intrigue, and, for lack of a better term, a kind of socio-political backdrop. But then I think people go on very quickly to say, yeah, but his real interest was in other things, in mysteries and thrills and developing suspense. And people talk about the term the MacGuffin, which the short version of it is, it's the thing in the film that the people in the film are worried about, but really we don't care so much about them. We just want to see Ingrid Bergman and Cary Grant. We just want to see the complexities of that unfold. So I know that's a kind of roundabout and long-winded way of saying I really take seriously what some people think is only the MacGuffin or the backdrop, the pretext. Let's give these characters sort of something to worry about and something to be concerned about. But really, our main interest is going to be what Hitchcock does with all that. So I would conclude by saying, I think Hitchcock was deeply concerned with the state of the world. And I think his films reflect that, and they portray it and they dramatize it and they analyze it. And not that he has any solutions. Oh, if we only did this. And it's not as though he completely just throws up in hands and says, people, we are screwed. I hope you've been intrigued by this film. But all the purpose is to say we are in trouble. But I think he gives us a useful perspective on it. So all that by way of saying, I think he takes the political background, my story, very, very seriously. And at the same time, he's also concerned with, well, are people able ever to really break through the many barriers that we have and form an intimate relationship? And again, I think he just interrelates those things so wonderfully, neither at the expense of the other, but in fact with a kind of synergy.
Oh, that's interesting. Oh, I like that. So Notorious is often described as a film noir, and we don't typically talk a lot about film noir on this podcast, but can you talk to us a little bit about what film noir is for listeners who might not have a really good idea of what that might be?
Well, what you said gives me the opportunity to excuse myself by saying I'll give a kind of shorthand version of it. But film noir was a very, very, continues to be, I should say, a very important genre, if you want to call it, or some people call it a style or a series of motifs on themes. If we were to enumerate them kind of in a straightforward way, it's almost as though someone could legitimately say, now, wait a minute, are you talking about a definition of film noir, or are you talking about a definition of a Hitchcockian film? Because there's absolutely over. There's the way, well, here's the way some people frequently put it. At the root, film noir is a kind of take on the world, and basically a kind of thematic and cultural context. Hitchcock was deeply influenced by the German filmmakers of the 1920s and the 1930s, expressionist filmmakers, for lack of a better term. And they were characterized with certain motifs, a lot of darkness, a lot of shadows, certain themes, what is often called the chaos. We live in a world that just doesn't make sense. We're tremendously vulnerable. We do what we can, but the forces of the world are stacked up against us. And that is shown visually, not only by darkness, hence noir, um, but also by all sorts of what you might call special effects and non-natural things we don't expect from a traditional Hollywood movie. So the camera angle is skewed, or it's very, very low, or very, very far. So those are all aspects of well, there are aspects of Hitchcock's approach to too. So I think the world divides between people who say Hitchcock is an exponent of film noir, and I think we can make a case for that. And Notorious has all those things that I just um they're in they're in Notorious. And then there are also people who say, well, let's not put him, in a straight jacket. He has those aspects, but he goes beyond them in any number of ways. But if what you're getting at is, are there of Notorious that leap out at us as characteristic of film noir? I think absolutely.
Oh, nice. I actually just watched this one for the first time just a couple of nights ago, and I really, really liked it. Um, Cary Grant, Ingrid Bergman, Claude Rains, they were so wonderful. I wanted to talk about Ingrid Bergman's character for a moment, Alicia. Um, she's a real standout in this movie. Do you, in your opinion, do you think she's one of Hitchcock's strongest female characters? In-
It's not only my opinion, and it's an opinion shared by many people, but I know it's an opinion shared by Hitchcock himself. He used her in several other films as well, and he's often the point for what he considers to be. I want to be careful, not necessarily the ideal woman or whatever, but in many respects, the kind of woman that he wants to feature in his film.
right.
There's everything maybe that romantic and associate that with a certain notion of beauty. And she has all that. We are absolutely captivated by her and engaged with her.
Mhm.
We as spectators, I think, are very much in that same kind of position as whatever leading man happens to be alongside her or trying to get alongside of her in a Hitchcock film, whether it's in Spellbound or whether it's in the later film Under Capricorn. Lesser known film, but in the very least, I think there's more to be said for it. But in the very least, we watch because she's in it. But part of
Definitely.
what we really admired is not just what we might call the romantic attractiveness of it and the beauty, um, but the sense of depth and complexity. And dare I say, at the risk of repeating a word that I used earlier, the vulnerability.
Mhm.
Ingrid Bergman captured one of Hitchcock's recurrent themes. I'll have to steal the title of a later, more modern film, not by Hitchcock, Portrait of a Woman Under Pressure. She just is under so much pressure in the film, and you summarized it so nicely. Her father is a Nazi. She is not. Um, she feels herself just really distraught because of what's happened to her personally.
Mhm.
And then she meets the Cary Grant character. There's that attraction, and then she's sent on a mission that takes her away from that. She is absolutely an incredible portrait of a woman under multiple layers. And boy, she is. I think there are other actors, other female actors who could do that well, but she just does so much for me. Just my opinion. Hitchcock just was absolutely reliant on and fascinated by her.
Oh, I thought she was phenomenal. I thought she was just like so great. And I also was I really liked Cary Grant in this role as well.
Yes.
And Bruce had mentioned that the producer had originally wanted an actor named Joseph Cotton to take that lead role, but Hitchcock actually selected Cary Grant. What do you think Cary Grant brings to the role that made Hitchcock so determined to cast him as this character, Devlin?
Again, there's so many things to say to that. Like Ingrid Bergman, Cary Grant was one of his go-to people. You can think of Ingrid Bergman, you can think of Grace Kelly, you think of Cary Grant, and I know this is gonna maybe come up later, even indirectly. We think of Jimmy Stewart. So Cary Grant is, as I said, one of his go-to people. Now, Joseph Cotton, not take anything away from him. He had been featured in an earlier film that Hitchcock often referred to as his favorite. Now, he sometimes said that about Notorious. He sometimes said that about Rear Window. So, depending on his mood and his moment. Shadow of a Doubt is an incredible film. Joseph Cotton is absolutely just wonderful in it. But, and I don't mean to sound, this might be not the most flattering way to say this. If I say that he's not a romantic lead, he's not a romantic lead in the way that Cary Grant is.
Right.
But who is? So in scripting Notorious, they certainly, he and his script writers and Ben Hecht, among others, they certainly knew that they not only had to build up that story of a complex and pressure-filled and romantic relationship, but they had to make it believable. And when I say believable, not only the complexity of it, but just the fact that these two people could be so connected.
Right.
And a large part of what the film is about is there are so many things that push them apart, but there is that fundamental sense of they should be together, they want to be together. But for each of the characters, there are things that keep them apart. Now, we talked about for Alicia, the Ingrid Bergman character, a lot of it is situational, but also you get a sense that she has this very complicated psychological life. She ain't going to be the easiest person to pair up with. Notorious is also the study of the male figure who is, in many respects, I hesitate to say this, all men are like that, but he certainly is an incredible picture, not the least in Hitchcock, not the only one in Hitchcock's gallery of men who have difficulty relating to women. So again, Cary does that in ways that probably not too many other people could. And Joseph Cotton, great actor that he is, wouldn't work for him.
Oh, nice. I have one more quick question on this one. You've spent many years studying Hitchcock. And when it comes to this movie, Notorious, do you ever notice anything new, or does anything ever crop out that you're like, oh my gosh, why didn't I see that before? Every time you watch Notorious, because I'm sure you've seen it a few times.
Oh yeah, and taught it and whatever, and read a lot about it, learned from a lot of people about it. But what you said, boy, I hope this doesn't sound either phony or naive. That experience that you describe of watching a Hitchcock film for the umpteenth time and saying, wow, I never saw that before. I never realized that before. I never put it together in quite that way before. Let me say that I got to say, honestly, that really is a recurrent experience.
Oh, wow.
Absolutely the case with Notorious. I think all of that comes from the fact that that are so textured, that are so deep, that are so complex, that are so layered, that maybe I'm letting myself off the hook. I don't think anybody could be expected to get it all in one screening or two screenings or 10 screenings. So I think that's what Hitchcock put into his films. And boy, I watched Notorious recently, and I couldn't necessarily call to mind the particulars there. Many of them are stylistic. You know the plot I comes next, but the stylistic and especially the visual details that convey what's emotionally what's going on. Very often, I kind of say, "Oh, I didn't see that before." So, no, that's my experience, and that's my experience not only of Notorious, but really all Hitchcock.
Oh, fantastic. How about you, Bruce? What did you think of Notorious?
I mean, the performances are outstanding. The lead characters for me were not that likable, especially Ingrid Bergman as Alicia. She's throwing tantrums early on. She's driving drunk. She won't give up the wheel to Cary Grant. One of the things that really stood out to me, though, I love the finish where her character is being taken to the hospital. Is she going to live? Is she not going to live? And then Sebastian, Claude Rains' character, he's got to go back into the house, and some guys who aren't very happy with him are going to be dealing with him. And then it kind of ends there. So we can only imagine what happens to him. I thought it was a great finish to the film. I loved it.
I love those dimensions that you just added to it. And for all that I was saying, oh, Ingrid Bergman, who couldn't be captivated and engaged? Exactly as you say, in some respects, she's not, if I say a likable character, I think she always holds our attention, but we don't always admire her. We always know that she has flaws, that she sometimes makes bad decisions. I think we have a sense that she is resourceful, but she is the proverbial work in progress. Now, let's be fair. Same thing about the Cary Grant character. Now, he's a representative of the United States government, and he's calling upon her to do her patriotic duty. But he is a work of art too, isn't he? And just like we get impatient with driving, and he says, I want to wipe that smile off your face. Maybe there's actually intriguing, and maybe we say, okay, she's got some depth, whatever. But you remember what he does? He's cold-hearted with her. And at one point when she's very troubled, but she's resisting, what does he do? He literally punches her and knocks her out. So that's an introduction to both of those characters, as maybe on the one hand, come on, we get it. Ingrid Bergman, Cary Grant, they're meant for each other. But when we see the characters that we play, it's going to be a long, tough road. But then fast forward to the ending, which we shouldn't. We should pay attention to all the details that lead us to that absolutely wonderful, satisfying, although open ending that you just mentioned. Short version, I think Alicia shows herself to be a person of incredible courage and integrity and resourcefulness. To say that she changes, that's a kind of maybe an oversimplification. She goes through hell, but it's a wonderful transformation. And the Cary Grant character goes through some transformations as well. And that allows, let's call it the at least tentative happy ending. And they walk out together, arm in arm. They won't leave each other's side. They, just like earlier in the film, in one of my favorite scenes, sequence, they kiss and they talk and they walk and they whatever for 2.5 minutes. And it's almost as though you see a whole intimate relationship transpiring there. And then they break from that, but then they come back to that. They end up together. We don't know what happens next. And Hitchcock is not known for his happy endings, but it is
No.
a satisfying ending. And then just very quickly, you mentioned Claude Rains. I don't know if it's an overstatement to say there are no secondary characters in Hitchcock's films. There are characters that are less likable and that have less screen time, but they all serve a very important function. And even though on the one hand, he's the Nazi, he's the villain of the piece. And let's not forget, he and his mother poisoned Alicia. So not a guy that we want to kind of root for. But when he is shut out of their car and he walks up the steps, exactly as you say, back to some guys really don't like him. I think there's a way in which Hitchcock, maybe much to our surprise, he makes us sympathize even with the character that if we were to put it down in cold hard facts, we should not be sympathetic to. But this is Hitchcock's complexity, and this is the artistry.
Nice. Okay, we're going to just take a very quick break, and we will come back with 2 more movies.
Great.
We'll be right back.
Welcome back to the Ghostlight Gallery podcast. We continue our look at some of the great Hitchcock films with one of the leading experts on Hitch, and that is Professor Sidney Gottlieb. We're going to move on to our 3rd film after breaking down Notorious and earlier Rebecca. Tracy, tell us about film number 3.
So released in 1956, we're going to talk about The Man Who Knew Too Much, and it stars James Stewart and Doris Day as an American couple whose vacation takes an unexpected turn after they become caught up in an international conspiracy plot. When their young son is kidnapped, they find themselves in a race against time to uncover the truth and bring their little boy home. It blends suspense, mystery, and some pretty good performances. And The Man Who Knew Too Much has become one of Hitchcock's best-known films, and it celebrates its 70th anniversary this year. So, my first question for you is, what do you think makes this movie stand out from the rest of his work? Why do you think this one is kind of one of the most notable films in his career?
That's always hard to kind of put your finger on why a particular film really catches on or whatever. So I want to say 2 things. One is that a lot of people gravitate towards things. Well, it has Doris Day in it. It has a wonderful song in it. It has Jimmy Stewart in it. Now, other Hitchcock films, of course, had Jimmy Stewart.
Mm-hmm.
It has not only the international intrigue, but a really, really exotic kind of setting. And it's not as though that's unheard of in a Hitchcock film, including going way back to when he made the first version of this film, which I'm sure we're going to talk about it at some point. But this really got the big widescreen Technicolor, big star, wonderful kind of the things that a lot of people want in an entertaining film and make a film memorable. There's all that.
Mm-hmm.
And then it has Hitchcock touches, which I have a feeling we'll get to in a moment a little bit more deeply. But when I started out by saying, at the risk of contradicting you, I think there are many ways in which this is a typical Hitchcock film. And if we made a list of things that we're used to seeing in a Hitchcock film, familiar plot elements, even familiar characters, including Jimmy Stewart. Where have I seen that guy before? So there are ways in which it is really of that particular genre. It's a Hitchcock film. This also, as I was saying earlier, this has never been one of my go-to Hitchcock films, but I've come to appreciate it more and more. And again, as I was saying about Rebecca, one of the things that's really helped me appreciate it more is to see more and more that this is, if not a woman's film, that the role of the main woman character in it is very, very prominent and very, very interesting in ways that I really hadn't been aware of before. So I'll get with the program, and sooner or later, maybe it will edge its way. And it is a film that I do on my list of Hitchcock favorite films. But it is a film that I've always enjoyed. It's hard not to get wrapped up into it.
Oh, no, absolutely. Interesting enough to prepare to kind of chat about these movies. I actually accidentally watched the 1934 version, and that was with Peter Lorre. And again, like it was very good. And it wasn't until, well, this morning, and I realized, oh my gosh, I need to go quickly find the 1956 version and watch that too. So I thought it was I was like, I panicked message Bruce. I'm like, oh my God. But the 1934 version I thought was actually quite interesting. I really like seeing Peter Lorre, and there were a few differences I noticed between both versions. So I'm kind of curious, why do you think Alfred Hitchcock would remake this story more than 20 years later?
Uh, I'm so glad you had a chance to see the earlier film for lots of reasons, because as you almost grudgingly said, well, here's a film made with a lot of people with British accents, made in 1934, with some sort of a bizarre kind of plot, not necessarily something that would leap out at us. And you kind of grudgingly said, but it was sort of interesting. Indeed. In Hitchcock's career, this is the 1934 version of The Man Who Knew Too Much is very often referred to as a real breakthrough film for Hitchcock. He had made a whole bunch of films before, 12, however many, lots of films, 15 films, very popular, very well respected. He made newspaper headlines as being the best director in England and the highest paid one. So it's not as though he was a novice or not respected. But this was a breakthrough film internationally as well as within England. And also many people feel this is when he got into he got his groove, in the groove that we recognize, the Hitchcock spy, suspense, mystery, thriller.
Right.
So it's a terrific film. And I guess some critics kind of jokingly say, well, the world divides, at least the Hitchcock world, divides between those who prefer the 1934 version and those who prefer the 1956 version. So I want to get back I wanted to give at least a little bit of that background, but tell me again the specific point that you wanted me to address, why he remade it.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious why you think he remade it. I mean, I did notice like little differences, with the mother character. She was a little bit different, and just, the little girl over the little boy. So yeah, I'm just kind of curious if there was like a reason that you were aware of, or if you had any thoughts on that.
Well, I do have a couple of thoughts on it. And I don't know if there's a direct statement that Hitchcock ever made, oh, I did it because of. Let me say a couple things. There is a way in which throughout his career, he wanted to, and in fact did, remake films that he had made earlier.
Mhm.
Probably the earliest film that he made that, well, he himself called it, this was the first true Hitchcock picture, The Lodger, a silent film that he made in 1926. Very popular. He had plans for doing another version of that in the 1940s. It's not as though he had any lack of material. I think he had a sense that I was really onto something. I liked what I did, but I think I can do something different with it. I can update it. I can make it more relevant. And I think he had a sense, we're talking about his plans for The Lodger.
Mhm.
I think he had a sense that in the mid-1940s, people were not going to go back and watch the original Lodger film he made in 1926. I think there were similar kind of factors at work. I think he had a very warm spot in his heart, so to speak, for the 1934 version of The Man Who Knew Too Much.
Mhm.
I think he realized that in many respects, I'm using the term loosely, he was constantly remaking his films. Maybe not literally, but some similar motifs, some similar plot dynamics, some similar issues, some similar stylistic motifs. So there was a way in which he was constantly making what, for lack of a better term, I might call the Hitchcock picture. Now, he made 53 films. I hope it doesn't sound overly cutesy if I say, following the lead of the great French critics of the 1950s that really made Hitchcock a household world and made us take him seriously, thinking of him as perhaps the great auteur, the author, a highly respected director. There is a way in which, even though he made 53 films, they all flow together. So I hope I'm not sidestepping it. Well, he was constant. The question that you posed, he was always remaking and going back to things. But I also think that he was particularly captivated by this particular story.
Mhm.
And I think he had a sense that he could do something different with it. And as you alluded to, it was different. Now, you mentioned very interestingly Peter Lorre. That's one of your major recollections of the
Yes.
1934 film. He's wonderful. He's the villain of the piece. Well, there are other villains, but like the, kind of really the linchpin of the nefarious mob there. Hitchcock loved his villains, and he often said something along the lines of, the better the villain, the better the film. I think the 1934 film has a much better villain in it than the 1956 film.
Yes.
What the 1956 film has, and again, you more than alluded to it, it's a woman under pressure. Her son has been kidnapped, and a woman who turns out to be very resourceful.
Mhm.
It's not as though the Jimmy Stewart character, disappears completely or doesn't contribute to it, but certainly much more than the 1934 film.
Yeah.
The woman, the Doris Day character, really steps up in this film. In Hitchcock, I feel obligated to say this. When Truffaut in his interview asked Hitchcock about the two versions, putting him on the spot, which do you prefer? I think he didn't want to renounce or denounce the 1934 version. Hitchcock, I think it was near and dear to his heart. But he said something along the lines of, the 1934 film was made by a talented amateur filmmaker.
Oh.
And the 1956 film was made by a much more experienced, fully fledged
Mhm.
professional filmmaker. Now, that's the most well-known statement that Hitchcock makes about the film, but he actually followed it up with another kind of related thing, basically saying in the later version, he had a much better sense of the audience than he did in the 1934 film. And I think that is wonderfully on display in the 1956 version. He really keeps the audience involved and engaged, and we go on the roller coaster ride with the characters. Now, that's something he tried to do, and I think succeeded to do in all his films, but I think he does that much better with the 1956 version of the film than the 1934 version.
Oh yeah, no, I think so as well. And Jimmy Stewart, I thought he was really great. And of course, we chatted a few moments ago that he's been in quite a number of Hitchcock's films. What do you think makes Jimmy Stewart such a great fit for Hitchcock?
Well, I'm glad I can conveniently bring in Hitchcock in his own words. And I think it's relevant at this point that when interviewers brought up the subject, hey, Mr. Hitchcock, you seem to really like Jimmy Stewart. You seem to really like his range. Why and what are the differences? And I hope I'm quoting him accurately when he said something along the lines of, "That is the person I wish I could be. What's not to like?" And especially visually and in terms of kind of the screen persona. Jimmy Stewart, again, I think I'm close to accurate in saying he's the man I really am. And I think what he meant by that is flawed, perhaps not the most physically attractive in terms of Hollywood star quality, but character with a lot of depth and complexity. And I think Hitchcock was rude enough to know that as a filmmaker, you can go away with romantic leads and physical beauty and that kind of attraction and engagement, but there's got to be more to it. I think the more was he used there, and like Jimmy Stewart, knowing that he wasn't the dazzling romantic presence that Cary Grant was, but that he was aging in other ways. And then when he did use a character, the actor Cary Grant to play a character, he made sure it was depth and complexity that. But it's impossible for me to think of Cary Grant in this film, just like it's possible for me to think of Jimmy Stewart in Notorious. So they each played terrific roles when Hitchcock was after different things, overlapping, but different things. And I think Jimmy Stewart worked very well in this film, including the sense where I say, and I hope this doesn't sound too negative, Jimmy Stewart he has his heroic side and his admirable side, his down to earth, again, I think, but whatever, but also is a sense that he is perfect character, just identified Ingrid Bergman playing the archetypal woman under pressure. Jimmy Stewart, par excellence, the archetypal Hitchcockian male under pressure.
Right.
He does that. I mean, he does that extraordinarily, but you see that the weight of the world is on him, and he captures that.
No, he definitely does. And just one more quick note for me. Doris Day, I just wanted to touch on her just for one moment. She was really great in this movie. And she brought a lot to this role. Do you feel that she's received enough credit for her performance? Do you think she was like adequately recognized in this movie?
It's so funny that you mentioned this, because you were talking before about, well, is there always more to be learned about Hitchcock or see things in the film that you never saw before? earlier, I was reading an article specifically. It's a brand new book, directing and performance, Hitchcock's films. And this chapter was on Doris Day. And it is very, very eye-opening in a very positive way, saying while we perhaps advocate towards Grace Kelly, Ingrid Bergman, some of the more well-known actors that he used, and we tend to think of Doris Day as, oh, wasn't she in some kind of schlocky movies, Watson movies, and oh, she was a great singer and her The Doris Day Show. Maybe we tend to hold that against her. So what I'm leading round to is this article really took the position that you more than hinting at. If we look closely at her film, it really, I want to be careful. We don't necessarily have to say, oh no, we should put the pantheon of great, of great actors or whatever. But does she do what she is called on to do in this film? Does she do it effectively and engagingly? So I'm glad that you read that. And I think that there's a way in which, as we continue to watch Hitchcock films, we're going to go deeper and deeper and deeper into the Ingrid Bergman and Grace Kelly, the expertise of these characters. But I also think we're going to go deeper and deeper into some of the other female roles that we maybe haven't given enough credit to, not only for the importance of the character that plays in the film, but also the skill that, in this case, Doris Day brings to it and makes it so effective. So I'm so glad you raised that. It's a wonderful point.
Oh, awesome. Oh, thank you so much. I guess we're going to pop on over to the next movie. So I will turn this on over to Bruce.
All right. Thank you, Tracy. Great stuff on The Man Who Knew Too Much. And now we move on to our final film. And it was Hitchcock's final film, came out 50 years ago, 1976. It's called Family Plot. So here's the storyline. A phony medium named Madame Blanche discovers that one of her clients, the very wealthy Julia Rainbird, is experiencing regrets over her 50-year-old decision to pressure her unwed sister to give up her baby so as to avoid a family scandal. Julia wants to find out who her lost nephew is, where he is, so that he can be the heir to the family fortune. So Mrs. Rainbird offers Madame Blanche $10,000 to use her alleged psychic powers to find him. Blanche and her boyfriend George, a cab driver, they begin an investigation. That leads them to cross paths with a Grady jeweler named Arthur Adamson and his girlfriend Fran. These two like to kidnap prominent citizens and hold them ransom for expensive jewels. And as we go through the story, it appears that Arthur may be the lost nephew and that he may have an even more sinister criminal past. So that's the basic story to Family Plot. First on this one, Sid, is it true that Hitchcock's health was really in considerable decline by the time of this filming, and he maybe was not as active and as hands-on as he was used to being?
Well, his health was not good at this time. He had, if I have the chronology straight, he had just had a pacemaker put in, and there are wonderful, truly Hitchcockian stories about he'd be in company and all of a sudden he'd rip open his shirt to show the, the kind of scar and the device or whatever. And I think he took a kind of bizarre pleasure in this really crazy contraption that he had to wear. But it was not a time, he was, if I have the chronology right, 75, 76 years old at the time. I say this feelingly. I hope that doesn't mean you're over the hill when you reach that age. But he was feeling his age and did have these various complaints. Also, Alma, his wife, who he was very, very close to, not only emotionally, a real partner in that regard, but who, as I hope people are increasingly aware of, a real contributor, not only as a sounding board and a consultant, but a real active, engaged person in the screenplays, in overseeing things, in selecting who might we use for this role. But what I'm leading up to is she was not doing well either. She had recently had a stroke. So there was this kind of aura of, dare I say, mortality. Practically speaking, he had been slowing down a little bit. Now, on the other hand, I've just been again reading reports of what kind of work Hitchcock was involved with, putting together the script and planning things and whatever. And he evidently was very actively involved in working on the script with the main screenwriter, Ernst Lehman, who was the screenwriter for North by Northwest and a terrific writer. And Hitchcock, as was his wont, he was very actively involved in plotting out this, how about this. Now, there was a novel that the film was based on, but as we were out earlier, it's sort of like, this is a starting point. Hitchcock used to say, I may have read the novel once and then I put it aside and then I make my film. So there was really a, a, a lot of variation and nuance and things like that. But to go to your point, I don't think this is a film that shows Hitchcock at his best. And it's hard to speculate why the film turned out the way it did. I think the film has lots of Hitchcock touches. I think it's a very watchable and entertaining film. I think it is also authentic Hitchcockian film in the way that I was trying to describe before, something along the lines of, we had some things work out. And you see them one way or another in the of his films. So I think there's a lot of interest in Leap On. Let me pause for a second because I really wanted to say this. The summary you gave of the film, the other film, and Tracy, your summaries, they've been very useful because they not only convey what the stories are on, but they give a kind of insight into, if I can use the term, issues, what the issues of the film are. So we get a sense from the way you describe the films about what happens, but we also get a sense of, well, in this case, the family plot. It's about law. It's about it's about crime and so many aspects about crimes. So in all those things make the film, I think, not only entertaining, substantive. He's dealing with real issues here, and they're familiar.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. Critics have been very hard on Family Plot, and I watched it for the first time earlier this week, and I went in thinking, oh, this is going to be awful. And while it's very different from many of his previous films, I was pleasantly surprised. It captivated me. I thought it was pretty darn good, an intricate plot, well photographed like all of his movies are, especially his color films. I thought it was really a good movie. And, you know, maybe people are looking at it too much, comparing it to his absolute classics.
Yeah.
But compared to ordinary filmmakers, there's nothing wrong with this movie in my mind.
I agree with you, and I see Tracy nodding too. And if I use the word, it's a very watchable film. And you know, for many filmmakers, for most filmmakers, they would kind of say, "Wow, okay, good, we got that under our belt." With Hitchcock, and again, especially it depends on who you're talking with. You're talking to a scholar, a critic, someone who is making claims for Hitchcock as not only one of the great filmmakers of all time, but one of the great artists of all time. And that was certainly the argument of the French critics that I mentioned earlier. And I also mentioned the critic, Robin Wood, who basically, in talking about films like Vertigo, for example, he said, this is not only one of the great films of all time, but it's one of the great works of art of all time. This is Van Gogh, this is Bach, as well as fill in the blank, Eisenstein, Renoir. So bringing things back to your point, when you talk to a critic like that, they aren't going to use family plot to pursue that argument. Now, that doesn't mean they'll trash it. And I think they might be very receptive to the point that I made a moment ago, that there are Hitchcockian elements of it. It's not a film to be taken lightly. But again, if you're making really, really high claims for Hitchcock as an artist and whatever, you don't reference family plot. One of the things that for me, and I don't remember exactly what I said the last time, but I'd be very surprised if I didn't sneak this in somehow. One of the wonderful things about Hitchcock for me is, to kind of summarize it very boldly, he is a great entertainer and he is a great artist. He's a person who engages us and captures us. And that's exactly what you were saying. That was your pleasant experience with family law. He's also an innovative and a serious and a very complex and creative artist. So at his best, he's hitting both of those absolutely heavily. I'm not sure you could say that about family. You can say it's entertaining, it's watchable, and there are moments, there are elements, including some formal ones that we might not necessarily notice or gravitate towards, that are that other side of the equation. And I'll mention one thing in particular. When Hitchcock talked about the film, I think I'm trying to think of Truffaut responding to the question, well, what was it that appealed to you about this? We would not do this. He said something along so the geometry of the film. What did he mean by that? Well, I think he meant the overall structure, that it's double plot and they intersect and they overlap, and there is a way in which an intricate and well wrought way that the pattern is very well done. And then also quite literally, you may remember a couple of overhead shots where we're looking down on these tiny little characters, and it's almost their geometrical grid. So there's something that maybe not a lot of people would notice, and it wouldn't make a lot of difference even if you did notice it. But that's something that Hitchcock said particularly. He was fascinated.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the individual performances. We have 4 considerable actors in this movie. You've got Barbara Harris and Bruce Dern. They're one of the couples. And then the other couple is Karen Black, long a favorite of mine, and William Devane. Who stood out for you among these 4?
They all work for me, but they don't work in the way that they're not going to make me forget about, it's coming, Cary Grant and Ingrid Bergman. But they work, and they each have a level of quirkiness, which I think is just absolutely wonderful and very special. And I don't say that to demean what we might call their acting abilities, because they are, as you say, formidable actors. Maybe we're talking about the 1970s now and a new school of acting. And not to go heavily into it, but this is not what we call traditional, classical, conventional acting. Laurence Olivier would not fit there. But getting back to your original question, there's something wonderful about each of them. I will say, and I'll try to drag Hitchcock into this, can you guess the one that he was most taken by? Maybe as a person, but also as an actor? Tick, 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 tick. Should I let the cat out of the bag? Take a guess.
I'm going to guess. I'm going to guess Barbara Harris.
Tracy, any thoughts about that? You're muted, so we need to hear you.
I was going to say maybe Karen Black.
And those would absolutely be the first ones that you would think of. You would have to assume it would be one of the women. Um, but the one that he talks the most about and is talked the most about is Bruce Dern. And he evidently got along fabulously with him. And I mean this positively, as wonderfully quirky an actor as you could imagine, in terms of his real life personality and the roles that he played. And he evidently was on a wonderful joking relationship with Hitchcock, which counts for a lot. You know, we think of Hitchcock as a great joker and a great practical joker. Sometimes that's held against Hitchcock, or he was mean to people or whatever. But joking is a way of interacting with people. And evidently he did that with Bruce Dern. But he also evidently gave him the ultimate compliment in the Hitchcock universe, which is he allowed Bruce Dern a lot of latitude in terms of how he played the role and his suggestions. So I hope I didn't go too far astray from your question. I think each of the characters adds something wonderful. But he did seem to have a particular interest in Bruce Dern in particular.
That actually leads perfectly into, I think, what is going to be my final question, and that's about Dern and Hitchcock. Supposedly, and this story may be completely made up, but supposedly on set, one day Dern is talking to Hitchcock, and he's basically saying to Hitchcock, why in the world did you pick me for this movie? And Hitchcock supposedly says, well, Mr. Packenow wanted $1 million, and Mr. Hitchcock doesn't pay $1 million. And people wondered, who in the world is Mr. Packenow? He was referring to Al Pacino. You've probably heard this story. I don't know if it's true, but it's great if it is. It's a great story.
I have heard that story, and I think, it's sort of when you try to characterize Hitchcock, you can go off. It depends on which part of him you grab onto. And this is Hitchcock at his wry and sarcastic. And I'm of the school that actors are cattle, and I wish I didn't have to deal with them. I wish I could be like Walt Disney and I could draw them. I didn't have to pay them. And if they didn't suit me, I could erase them. That side of Hitchcock. So it sounds quite believable. But I also think it's believable, the anecdotes that I was relating. In any event, he made good use of the character. And again, the quirkiness that Bruce Dern and all the other three, the main actors, bring to the film, that is an essential aspect of the family plot. And it's a quirkiness that also goes into what you might call the element of the ghostly side, the supernatural side. There is that quirky side. And you made a repeated point when you summarized the film so nicely about apparently she's a psychic, and she pretends to be or whatever. And I think Hitchcock had a lot of fun with that. And again, I think the Barbara Harris character captures that so incredibly. And I don't know how close we're heading to wrapping things up, but even if this isn't the absolute last word being spoken, it's clear that he thought enough of her to give her, if I say the last word, remember, it's not the
Yeah.
last word. Um, do you want to say it, or will you allow me to say it? He wants
No, go say it. Yeah.
to end with the wink. And it is a wonderful wink. And for all that we've been talking about, Hitchcockian means this, Hitchcockian means that, I like the idea that sort of the last thing that we get of the many things that are involved in what we call Hitchcockian is that wink. And she does it so incredibly
Yeah.
well.
Is that the only time in any of his films that one of the characters kind of steps out and looks at the audience and communicates with the audience?
You know, I thought you
I
were
don't
going to
remember him ever doing that.
I was all set for what I thought you were going to ask, which is that the only really climactic and dramatic wink in a Hitchcock film? There are other winks, including perhaps the most famous one, in one of his 30s thrillers, Young and Innocent, where there's this long camera movement into a character and it ends with an ultra close up of the character winking. And that tells us a lot about the plot. So there are other winks. And there are also other breaking the fourth wall. The character looks directly at us. There are actually, it's not as though they happen constantly, but they are there. But this is the only one that happens, I think, in such a really, really, kind of concluding pivotal way.
Yeah.
And that's part of the idea of the Hitchcockian wink. He was so famous for saying, right, and especially all our threads are coming together to Ingrid Bergman. Ingrid, it's only a movie. Well, one of the kind of tried and true ways of doing that is by breaking the fourth wall and having a character look directly out at us, whether they wink or not. But again, it's a roundabout way of saying maybe not. He didn't do it exactly in the kind of pivotal way in other films that he does here, but he has his way of breaking the fourth wall and winking at us for sure.
Very interesting. It's a film that, again, doesn't hold up to some of his classics, but is well worth watching. It's a mystery. It's a thriller. It's got moments of comedy, some really good individual performances. My favorite was Barbara Harris in this movie. Karen Black actually had less screen time than the other four actors, which is kind of interesting, but I thought
I don't want to interrupt.
Great stuff from,
I just want to go off that because I was really intrigued by your mention of the Karen Black character, and she's someone I love in particular, especially from the film Day of the Locust, which is just a kind of odd film, but which I really love, and she's terrific in it. But in my reading up to prepare, because I want to come into these sessions with you guys as fully armed and prepared as possible. I read some really interesting comments about the Karen Black character. The most interesting to me is that as much as Hitchcock gave Bruce Dern, not necessarily, carte blanche, can I use that in talking about a film where the main character is Madame Blanche? But anyway, maybe I've got a little Hitchcock in me. But in any event, as much as he gave Bruce Dern a lot of rope, another Hitchcockian pun, he was concerned about Karen Black's performance because he felt that she was constantly trying to push towards the more glamorous and the more kind of upfront kind of character. And he didn't want that. And I got to say, when I watched the film recently and she comes in with the blonde wig and the dark glasses, va boom. I mean, she is a presence. And Hitchcock obviously directed it that way, but that's not what he wanted to emphasize. He was more interested, evidently, in her when she takes the wig off and she's the dark-haired, and in some respects, she's the more sullen and maybe more this is not a word he used, but maybe threatening, dangerous kind of character. So I'm leading up to the thing that I wasn't aware of that you may find particularly interesting. This was the 70s, and the idea of not only deceit, but of kidnapping for ransom. The one character in the mid-70s that would have come to everybody's mind would have been Patty Hearst. And in the discussion that I was reading, it indicated that that's the kind of allusion. It's not something that everyone would recognize, but that's the kind of character type, the dark-haired, mysterious, and whatever, not a glamorous thing or whatever. And he ultimately, I think that's what he was aiming to get out of Karen Black's performance. And the performance is not so much what she says, but how he visualizes her. This is Hitchcock's pure cinema. I don't want to have photographs of people talking, but I want to use visual means to convey all the things that I want to get across. And so that's a tiny little anecdote that I thought you might in particular find interesting, because you're fascinated, as I am, by the Karen Black character.
Great stuff from our guest, Sidney Gottlieb, one of the great experts on Alfred Hitchcock. We've enjoyed talking about Family Plot, The Man Who Knew Too Much, Notorious, and Rebecca. Sidney is a professor, longtime professor, 50 years now, at Sacred Heart in Connecticut, and he has a terrific Hitchcock annual that he co-edits. You'll find some other books out there that are books that he has edited about Hitchcock. Great resource for fans of film, fans of Hitchcock, fans of mystery and thriller. Great stuff. Thank you, Sidney.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the invitation back. And I feel tempted to say something like, did I pass the audition? If I did, maybe we'll meet again. And unlike Al Pacino, whatever he said, Pachinko or whatever, I don't have
Packing out.
Packing out, yes. Unlike that guy, I can be had for just another invitation. Maybe I'll see you again. But thanks so much. It's a great pleasure to talk with you.
Yeah, you more than passed the audition. We're ready to offer a contract. So great stuff from Sidney Gottlieb. We thank Sidney. We thank, of course, Tracy Asteria as well. We appreciate all of you joining us in this Museum of the Macabre. And we do hope we'll see you again next time in the Ghostly Gallery.